Monday morning. Hope you had a great weekend. So, well, let's make a quick announcement. George is going to be hosting Base Camp this week. It's going to be a great event. He's going to talk about leadership and the importance of the various levels of leadership, the types of leadership, and how important that is in today's market, particularly if you're looking to go beyond survival and you're looking to thrive. So make certain you're there. That's 11 a.m., 11 to noon at the Unit Park office this Wednesday. So, anytime I'm going to speak, and that includes, of course, this conversation, I think about, well, what message do the agents need to hear? What's the most important message that I could share with them at this time? And I have to tell you that the thing that kept coming back to me regarding this conversation this morning was one word, and it was prospecting. And again, I know we talk about prospecting a lot, but here's the thing. We talk about prospecting a lot because ultimately, I am absolutely certain that every single one of you would say that you don't do enough of that. Would that be fair to say? Let's be honest. Would you admit to me that it's fair to say that you probably don't do enough prospecting based upon the amount of business that you want to have, the amount of money that you want to make? Would that be fair? Somebody give me a... Okay, good. Thank you for admitting that. So the question is, well, first of all, maybe a couple of statements. Look, prospecting is the job. That is your job. When you sign up for real estate, I know that nobody told you this, and the reason they didn't tell you this at school. Your first brokerage, if Everest wasn't your first brokerage, didn't tell you this. They didn't tell you that prospecting is the job. And why is that? Well, they didn't tell you that because they didn't want to scare you away. Let's be honest. If real estate schools had spent most of their time telling you that real estate was about prospecting, you'd have to reach out to, make cold calls to people you don't know, right? If the first brokerage you sat down with said, well, here, let me make it really clear to you that we expect, and your job is to every single day reach out to strangers you don't know and to become an exceptional presenter, probably most of us wouldn't have gotten into the business. But here's the truth, gang. It is the job. And in the real world, when you don't work, you don't get paid. Well, that's true in real estate. So if you don't work, meaning if you don't prospect, you're not going to get paid. And how many of you have experienced that in your career? How many of you maybe are experiencing that now? You're not making enough money. Well, I can tell you unequivocally, it's not the market. It's not because interest rates have fallen. It's because you're not doing your job to the level that you need to, as consistently as you need to. So my question is, well, if prospecting is the job, then how do we succeed at it? How do we succeed at that job of prospecting? So I want you to write that question down. How do I succeed at prospecting? How do I succeed at getting to the point that I'm actually going to do it? Set aside the skill. I'm not talking about the skill of prospecting. I'm just talking about the ability to consistently get on the phone and prospect. That's what I'm talking about. Because I don't care what your skill level is. I'm more concerned about whether you're actually prospecting consistently. Does that make sense? Yes or yes?
Yes.
Yes. So, okay, so I want you to think about that. I want you to really listen to what I'm saying. The most important thing isn't your level of skill relative to prospecting. The most important thing relative to prospecting is your consistency at it. So how do we succeed at it? Well, the first thing I want you to write down is this. I have to intend it. I have to intend to prospect. I have to intend to prospect. Let me ask you a question. Do you wake up intending to prospect every single day, Monday through Friday? Like, seriously, do you wake up with the intention that you're going to prospect consistently? Is it your intention? Is it your focus? I mean, really, are you committed to prospecting? See, and if you're not, then I would say, well, it's going to be difficult to succeed in the business and succeed at prospecting if you don't intend it. So here's the question that I want you to write down for yourself relative to this point. How do I get to a point? How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it? How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it? Do what? Truly intend to prospect consistently. How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it, to prospect consistently? I want you to think about that. How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it, to prospect consistently? I'm going to say it one more time. How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it? And when I say do it, the it is to prospect consistently. And here's the answer that I came up with as I was thinking about this. This is my best answer for you, and I want you to listen to this. It's a very simple answer, but after you listen to it, I want you to write it down, because this is the answer. There is no other answer. I have to change my mindset about it. I have to change my mindset about it. I'm going to go back to the question. How do I get to a point where I truly intend to do it? Well, I have to change my mindset about it. See, if I've got the wrong mindset about prospecting, I'm not going to do it. If I'm afraid of prospecting, I'm not going to do it. So I've written down 4 thoughts relative to this about how do I change my mindset? How is it that I change my mindset as it relates to prospecting? How would I change my mindset? Well, the first thing I wrote down is this, is I have to change my perspective on it. I'm not begging. When I make a prospecting call, whether it's to my sphere of influence, FSBO's expired, just listed, just sold, doesn't matter who I'm calling, this is the mindset that I have to have, that you have to have, is I'm not begging, I'm contributing. That is a very powerful statement. It may not sound like it, but I want you to think about that. That if every time it was time to prospect, or the thought of you prospecting, you didn't think, well, I'm begging for business, I'm bothering people, but rather I'm contributing, I'm offering value, how would their perspective change? And how would your perspective change? If you truly knew that when you called somebody that you weren't begging, but that you were contributing, how would you feel about making the call?
Much better.
Much better, right? Imagine this, Michael. Imagine your doctor calling you 4 times a year, unsolicited. He or she picks up the phone and says, Michael, good morning, how are you? And you say, who's this? And you say, well, this is Dr. Ciet. Dr. Ciet, what's going on? Nothing. I was just calling to check in with you to see how you're feeling. Now imagine your doctor did that for you 4 times a year. How would you feel about your doctor? What would you think?
He really cared about
doctor.
That he really cares about you. That's exactly what I thought. I thought if my doctor were to unsolicited pick up the phone and say, hey, my doctor's Dr. Coleman, Stephen Coleman and Draper. If he picked up the phone and said, hey, John, I was thinking about you. I was just calling to check in on you. How are you doing? I would tell you, I would be blown away. Now, my doctor's never done that. Never done that. But if he did, I would be blown away. So look, we have to change our perspective on this. I'm not begging. If Dr. Coleman were to call me up, he's not begging. He's not asking me to commit to coming in and getting lab work done and to get a vaccine that he can make some money on. He was truly checking in on me to see how I'm doing. Now, I've had a doctor do that. You know, when I had my heart surgery earlier this year, I actually had the doctor pick up the phone, call me a few days after the surgery and say, hey, John, this is Dr. Day. I just wanted to check in with you. How are you feeling? Now, how do you think that made me feel?
Awesome.
Careful.
Yeah. Yes, because I genuinely knew that he cared about how I was feeling. Otherwise, he wouldn't have what?
Wouldn't have called.
Wouldn't have called. He wouldn't have called. So I met somebody, oh gosh, it was in 2015. I was taking a rider's course for a motorcycle because I had to get the designation because I had just bought a motorcycle. And before I took delivery of the motorcycle, I made certain that I took a rider's course down the Harley Davidson dealership. And there were several people in the class with me. You know, there was in class at a desk, you know, listening to instructors talk and taking notes. But then you also got to a point where you went out and actually rode the motorcycle. Well, I had a chance to spend several days with a gentleman by the name of Garn Jensen. And I didn't know Garn before I took the class with him. and didn't know what he did. But over the course of the few days that we spent together, I found out that he's an insurance salesman. And we didn't talk a lot about that. We didn't talk a lot about the fact that I owned a real estate company and was in this business. But we got to know each other at least superficially during the course. And when it was all said and done, we had a relatively good connection. We liked each other's energy. And so we exchanged telephone numbers and said, hey, we should probably go for a ride on our new motorcycles. But what is interesting is that we never did. We never did. But what is interesting, and the reason I share this with you, is because Garn Jensen would pick up the phone, and at seemingly random times, because I thought they were completely random times. I am absolutely certain at this point they weren't. But from my perspective, they were random. Well, he would randomly, quote unquote, pick up the phone and call me and just check in and say, hey, John, how are you doing? How's that motorcycle? You got any fun rides lately? And of course, we would have that conversation. It wouldn't last very long, a few minutes, maybe sometimes 10 minutes. Depends upon, what was going on with my day and with his. Sometimes we didn't have as much time. But he just called in to check in. Now, what is interesting is that he did that for about a year. Maybe not quite that. But I remember this particular call. He called me, John, how you doing? Well, I'm great, Garn, but I'm frustrated. Really, what's going on? I said, your timing's impeccable. He said, why? What's going on? I said, I've been working with my current insurance representative, my insurance agent, for about 20 years. And, it's been really good. It's been a great relationship. I insure my home through her. I insure all of my cars through her. I send her a lot of business, a lot of cars, nice big house, a lot of insurance. I said, but what is interesting is over the years, for the lack of a better way of saying it, she's just kind of forgotten about me. She used to call me all the time, used to check in on me. And when I would call the office, I got personalized care, whether it was with her or her assistant. But it's gotten to a point where she doesn't call me anymore. And when I call into her office, the people who work there don't even know who I am. I said, I'm frustrated. And I just had a situation where I didn't get the service that I wanted. Would you be interested in helping me with my insurance? And he said, would I be interested? Well, of course. And so at that moment, I began the process of transferring all of my insurance over to Garn. And by the end of that day, it was all done. And I've been working with him now since 2016, approximately. What is interesting is, of course, what? Garn was calling me consistently. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just checking in. In other words, he was contributing. So my point was, I'm not begging, I'm contributing. And that's exactly what Garn did. He just picked up the phone and he just checked in. Hey, how are you doing? Is there anything I could do for you? He never said, hey, John, I need you to stop working with your current insurance agent, and I'd like you to transfer everything over to me. That was never the conversation, ever, ever. He never said that. Now, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't ask people, hey, do you have any interest in buying or selling real estate? Is there anything I can help you with? But he didn't say, hey, do you want to sell your home? I need to come over now and list it. That wasn't the tone of the conversation. So I want you to write this down relative to this point. I am an expert. I am an expert. I offer value. I am an expert. I offer value. See, it's much easier for you to have the mindset that you're not begging, but rather that you are contributing. If you can say that I am an expert. When my heart doctor, who went to school for, I don't know, probably 15 years, including his residency, he went to school that many years to become a heart surgeon. That when he picks up the phone and says, John, how are you? Man, I feel really good. Because the guy's busy. He's an expert. He's a professional. He's busy. He's successful. And when he takes the time to call me, I feel good. I feel important. Well, if you're an expert and you offer tons of value, you know the market, you understand the process, and people know that, how are they going to treat you? How are they going to perceive you? So think about that. I am an expert. I offer value. Well, if you're going to be an expert, if you're going to offer value, then you have to do what an expert does. You have to get educated. You have to participate. So one of the things that I'm suggesting is that, are you educating yourself? Do you really understand the market? And mind if I were to ask you right now, do you know how many homes are listed in the entire state? You might say, well, I don't serve the entire state. Well, but you're an expert in this business. Shouldn't you know that? How many homes are on the market in Salt Lake County, or the market you serve? How many active listings are there? How many went under contract in the last 30 days? What are interest rates today? What are the experts saying about interest rates over the next 30 days, over the next 90 days, over the next 180 days, over the course of 2024? What are they saying? See, if you don't know the answers to those questions, that when it comes time to the idea of prospecting, you probably feel like you are begging, because you're not bringing the value, the confidence that people need, because ultimately that's what they need. They need you to be confident, because there's so much uncertainty in the world, in the market. They see it on the news, they hear it from their neighbors, from their family members, that there's so much negativity, that what they really need is somebody who's confident, who understands. I want you to think about that. So if you're not begging, but you're contributing, you're an expert. And experts are experts because they get deep into what it is that they do. They know it, they understand it. They're up to speed, so to speak. So do what an expert does. Get educated and participate. Well, how could you do that? What does that mean? Well, when was the last time that you showed up for morning ascent? When was the last time you showed up for base camp? And I don't mean once in a while, I mean consistently. I mean every morning, every time. And when I say every, I'm talking about 80%, because what I know is that the universe will hand you 100% of what you want if you'll stick to the routine 80% of the time, which is a great relationship. But participate.
So, John, does it count when we come on person and then we do online, we do a mix of both?
You know, it's a great question, Luz, and I would say it is always better if you can do it in person. Here's why. Because if you show up in person, then I know that it's more likely the next step that you will take is to actually get on the phone and prospect.
Sure.
Because you're in an environment where other people are doing that. But if you're at home, right, and you watch Morning Ascent, I know the chances of you prospecting, of actually picking up the phone, are much less. And the question is why? Well, because there are a lot more distractions at home than there are at the office. And I know that from experience, because I used to try to do my work in real estate from home. That didn't work out very well. I spent a lot of money finishing an office in the home, put a lot of nice furniture in there. And what I found, this was years ago, what I found is that I ended up doing a lot of things other than real estate. And when I came to that conclusion, I stopped doing that. I got back into the office. So my answer is, I understand there are times where it's not possible to come in. And
yeah, those times. Those times when it's not
those
possible.
are the times, but otherwise get into the office and participate. Get educated, participate. Okay. The second thing that I want you to write down in terms of, you know, how do I get to that point where I do it consistently? How do I change my mindset about it? Right. Well, number one was you have to believe that you're not begging, but rather you're contributing. Number two is be consistent. So I am being consistent. I have to change my mindset. I am consistent. I don't do it once in a while. I'm consistent. I do it when I commit that I'm going to do it. That gives me integrity. It also gives me familiarity. When I do something consistently, when I say I'm going to do it, then I do it. How do I feel about myself? I feel what?
You feel good.
I feel good about myself. I have integrity. The second thing would be this. It also is familiar. How do you feel about things that you do consistently? You feel more familiar with them. Well, if you're more familiar with anything, how do you feel about that thing, doing that thing? You feel more confident or less confident?
More confident.
Yes. When you're more familiar with anything that you do, you're going to be more confident relative to that thing. Well, one of the reasons that most people aren't very confident when it comes to prospecting is because they don't do it very consistently. So they're not very familiar with it. And I'm not talking about the skill set. Don't confuse the two. I'm talking about just the familiarity of actually doing it. In other words, having the mindset that that's what I do. I intend to do it. I wake up, I come to morning ascent, and then the next thing I do is I get on the phone. I'm familiar with the process, the routine of doing it. Okay, so be consistent. So I want you to write this down relative to this point. It is easier to be confident when I am consistent. It is easier to be confident when I am consistent. And for how many of you does that ring true? You hear that statement, or you write that down, you read it. It's easier to be confident when I am consistent. When you read that, doesn't that ring true? Yes? No?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
John, is it fair to say that our first job is to establish the consistency, the habit, and along the way perfect the skills?
That's exactly it. Because Luz, let me ask you a question. You tell me one thing in your life that you got really good at by just studying it as opposed to doing it. For example, riding a bike. Do you know how to ride a bike?
Sure.
Yeah. Did you learn to ride the bike by watching other people do it, or just simply getting on the bike that you didn't know how to operate and falling off of it several times?
Scraping your knee.
Yeah, right. Your knees, your elbows, all of that, right? How about swimming? Did you learn how to swim? If you know how to swim, did you learn how to swim watching other people do it? Of course, the answer is what? No.
No.
You learn how to swim by drinking a lot of chlorinated water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the answer is no, you actually have to do the thing, right? And in doing the thing, then you will progress. But you'll never progress if you don't actually do the thing. You know, in college, it was always interesting to go to classes where, because I majored in economics, so I was in the business department. And it was always interesting to go to classes where they were led by teachers who had worked in the real world versus teachers who'd only studied the quote unquote real world in textbooks. So their subjects they taught based upon what they had learned in college, but they had never actually done in the real world, versus those professors who'd actually done what it was they were teaching. It was always a much different experience in those two different classes, in those two different scenarios. It is so much easier to understand something and to be confident in it when you've actually done that thing, as opposed to just studied it from afar. We all know this.
Can I comment?
Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
One of my professors, who was professor of the music department, my other degree is psychology, but he, this is obviously something that you learn by doing. And he said, anybody can teach, because there's a lot of people that sing well and teach, but they haven't sung at the opera. They haven't in New York. They haven't sung through Europe. They haven't really applied. And so they do not get a position that he had. So his comment was, anyone can teach.
Yeah, anyone can teach. Yeah, and we can understand anything to a certain extent. You can understand prospecting to a certain extent by studying the idea, but you will always make more progress and faster progress by actually doing it. I know we may not like that rule. It would be great to know exactly what to say and how to say it and be an absolute expert on prospecting before we ever do it. That's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way with prospecting. It doesn't work that way with anything else that we could do, including playing the piano or singing opera or a sport, soccer, for that matter. So here's the next point relative to changing the mindset. so that we're permitting ourselves to actually more consistently prospect, This is the next point. I want you to write this down. I must expect great outcomes. I must expect great outcomes. I must expect great outcomes. Let me ask you a question. Why in your right mind would you ever prospect consistently if you didn't believe in the outcome, if you thought that the outcome was going to be negative, if you believed that everybody was mean and nasty and nothing good was coming of it? Why would you prospect? And of course, the answer is you don't. Right? Think about that. If you believed that people were kind, understanding, and caring, and you believed that everybody would say yes when you called them to ask them if they were interested in buying or selling real estate, how many times a week would you miss prospecting? How many times a week would you miss it if you believe people were kind, caring, and understanding and would say yes when you asked them the question of whether they were interested in buying or selling real estate? Would you miss any prospecting sessions during the week?
No, never.
No, you wouldn't, ever, ever. I guarantee you this, Michael. Michael Jordan never showed up to a game expecting he was going to lose. Why would he show up to that game? He would just tell his coach, hey, sorry, Phil, but I'm sick. I can't make it to the game. Because Michael believed, look, I'm not going to win the game, so why would I show up to lose? I'm just going to let the team lose. I prefer to go do something else. Right? So I want you to write this down relative to this point, because the point is what? I have to expect great outcomes. So write this down. I expect a yes. When I pick up the phone and I call somebody, I expect they're going to say yes. Otherwise, why would I ever make the call? I expect a yes, but I'm not surprised when they say no. When I prospect for recruits, when I'm looking for an agent to join the company, before I make the call, I have that conversation with myself and I say, I expect they're going to say yes. That's why I'm making the call. But I'm also not surprised if they say no. It's not a question of whether they're going to say no. At times they are. But it's also not a question of whether they're going to say yes. And I get to decide whether I'm going to come down on the side of optimism or pessimism. The pessimist would say, well, an optimist doesn't know enough to be an optimist about the future. Well, that's true. But I could also say that a pessimist doesn't know enough about the future to be a pessimist. So ultimately, that means what? That it is a choice. So therefore, I choose to expect great outcomes. I expect a yes when I pick up the phone. But I'm also not surprised when they say no. Imagine that you had a kid, for example, that you wanted to coach and teach how to play soccer. And rather than getting them in a game or in any sort of I don't know if you call it scrimmage, you do in football, but whatever you call it, practice, but you don't get them in actual practice where they're working with other soccer players. You're just showing them one-on-one. You show them a move, a technique, and then they practice it, they try it. And that's how they learn to play soccer. But never play against somebody else. Well, what's the goal of soccer? The goal of soccer is to take that ball and to do what?
Score a goal.
Yeah, score a goal by getting it into the what?
Net.
The net. Well, that's the offense's, plan. That's what they're supposed to do. But what's defense supposed to do?
Stop it.
Stop it. So defense is constantly trying to take what away?
The ball.
The ball. So what if you had a kid that you coached, but you never showed them that the defense is always going to try to take the ball, and you put them into the first game, they show up and immediately they get the ball and everything's great and they're headed down, towards his team's net or her team's net, and then the defense all of a sudden does what? They take the ball. And this soccer player that you coach is absolutely distraught and surprised by it. What are you doing? You're not supposed to do that. What do you mean they're not supposed to do that? Of course they're supposed to do that. That's their job. That's what they do. Jeremy this morning talked about the reflex no in morning ascent. The reflex no meaning that we have a tendency as human beings to just simply say no because we are socialized. We're trained to say no. You go shopping. I know that by default, I'm this way. I really work hard not to do this, but by default, I'm this way. The sales attendant, the sales clerk will walk up. I come to Nordstrom, and I'll walk in and the salesman will say, "May I help you?" And my response is what in most cases? How do I respond?
No.
Yeah, no, not only no, but what do I say? No, I'm what?
Just looking.
Yeah, lose. You will never catch me in Nordstrom just looking. If I am there, I'm there to buy something specifically. I don't like shopping. I didn't end up there by accident. It's not my favorite pastime. I don't enjoy doing it. So when I say no, I'm just looking, that's actually not what?
Not true.
It's not true. But I've been socialized to just simply say no despite the real answer. So I remember years ago making a just listed, just sold call. And we were doing it at a prospecting school with agents. And I was, letting agents split in with me as I was prospecting. And I remember making a call to a gal who lived out in Eagle Mountain. And I asked her, "Do you have any plans on, moving now in the near future?" She said, "Oh, no. Oh, no, no. We've only been here about 4 years, and we absolutely love the area." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Good for you. How did you happen to pick this area?" And she gave me her reasons as to why. And she said, "Yeah, we have no intention of moving." I said, "Well, that's great. And where did you move from?" And she told me that. And, I asked her more about her family. We talked for probably about 10 minutes. It was no less than 10 minutes, no more than 15, somewhere in that range. And in the conversation, she said, "Yeah, and my husband recently had some knee surgery, and he's really struggling with getting up and down the stairs in the house. Our bedroom is on the second level. It's a 2-story. And so we've really been talking about maybe finding a home that is a 1 level." And I'm thinking to myself, 10, 15 minutes ago, she said, "Absolutely not. We're not moving." And now she's saying, "Yeah, we've been thinking about buying a Rambler so that our bedroom's on the main level." Now, I don't know exactly what she heard me say when I asked her the question, "Do you have any plans of buying or selling now in the near future?" What I suspect she did was her reflex no. What she probably also heard is, "Are you interested in moving out of the neighborhood?" No. But what she was interested in was staying in the neighborhood, but exchanging her 2-story home for one of the neighbor's Ramblers. That she was interested in. And of course, I set an appointment with her. So I just want you to keep in mind that when people say no, it doesn't always mean no. It could be the reflex no. Maybe they don't understand the entire question, or maybe it's because they don't feel safe enough to tell you the truth. And so your job is to, number one, expect that they're going to say yes, but when they say no, don't be surprised and continue the conversation. See, if I expect great outcomes, if I expect people are going to say yes, it is more likely that I'm actually going to consistently prospect. Does this make sense? Yes or yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, if you are surprised by people saying no, then you're not paying attention to the world, because people are going to say no. It's what they do, right? But if you have the mindset that people are always going to say no, and nobody will ever say yes, well, then why would you ever prospect? And to my point earlier, as an optimist, I believe that the vast majority of the time, people are going to say yes. You can say, "Well, John, but that's not true." I don't care. I get to choose what I believe, and that I believe. Because if I don't believe that, then I'm not going to prospect consistently. And if I don't prospect consistently, I'm not doing my job. And if I don't do my job, then I'm not going to get paid. And how well is that going to work out for me? Not very well. The next point, we're almost done. In fact, this is the last point of the 4 points that I want to give you, then I just have a conclusion. How do I get to a point where I'm confident and I do it consistently? I've got to create a routine. So create a routine, gang. Get really specific about a routine, what you do every single day. If you're going to intend to prospect, well, man, you have to have a routine. So I want you to write this down relative to this. I know I am more confident. I know I am more confident. I know I am more confident when I have, comma, know, and stick with my routine. I know I am more confident when I have, know, and stick with my routine. Doesn't that make sense? It's a lot easier to be confident when you have a routine, when you know what that routine is, and when you stick with that routine. I'm always going to be more confident when I create the routine, I know it, and I stick with it. But what is that routine? Very simple things. I wrote down 5 things. Number 1, make certain that I am bookending my day. Before I go to bed, I always listen to something positive. When I get up, I always listen to something positive. Non-negotiable. Always go to bed with something positive. In the morning, always wake up with something positive. Number 2, come to morning ascent. Come to morning ascent. I don't know the last time that any of you have been into morning ascent personally in office. I know that as I looked, Michael, I know you have been recently. I know Luz that you tend to be. I know Rebecca, you're down south, you can't. But if you've been over the last few weeks, you know that we're getting between Zoom and people live, we're getting 50 to 60 people, but we're getting 30 to 35 people in the room. There's great energy there. How could you not have a better, more confident experience by doing that as compared to not doing that, by not coming in? And that's, Luz, why I say that it's so important. If you can come into the office and participate, it's more likely you're going to do the next thing, which is prospecting. So create the routine. Book in with positive, attend morning ascent, and then prospect. Prospect, and I would say prospect with others in the office. If you can't prospect in the office, then of course prospect, but you're more likely to prospect if you're in the office, and then you do it with other people because there's accountability with that. There's synergy. You learn from one another. And the next thing is this: water and nutrition, drinking enough. The number 1 cause of headaches, dehydration. Nutrition, eating the right things. You would never buy a high-end luxury car and put crappy gas in. You just wouldn't do it. Well, if you expect your high-end car, your vessel through which whatever you want to accomplish is going to accomplish it, you have to feed it the right gas, the right energy. So good nutrition consistently. And then the last thing is this: sleep. Make certain you're getting enough sleep. That's your routine. I bookend. I listen to things that are positive, or read things that are positive, or watch things that are positive before I go to bed and when I get up. I attend morning ascent. I prospect. I drink water consistently. It's one of our affirmations. I eat consistently in the right foods, and then I sleep. I get enough sleep so I can rebuild on a cellular level, so I can bring a high energy person to the opportunities of conversations about helping people get into real estate or buy and sell real estate if that's what you're doing. So gang, let's just conclude on this. Real estate is not a complicated business. It is really not. We make it complicated. I hope that having this conversation and going over these 4 or 5 points has helped kind of demystify this, because it is not a mystery. It's not. Real estate is not a complicated business. We make it complicated because we avoid the truth. We don't like the truth, because we end up, I'm going to go back to the very beginning. We end up being in a mindset that doesn't permit us to do the things we need to do, to be the person we need to be, to to demystify it. See, if we're confused, if we lack confidence, then we're going to make real estate very complicated. But see, if we're confident, if we have the right mindset about real estate, and your confidence doesn't come from your high level of skill relative to prospecting. It has everything to do with your mindset about prospecting and doing these things that I've talked about. And if you'll do these things, I promise you that it gets easier and easier and easier. And it ultimately provides this, which I know you're all looking for. It provides predictability and duplication of your outcomes despite what the market is doing. Now, how many of you would like that? Predictably with duplication, a high level of business despite what the market is doing. Would you not all like that? Say yes.
I would for sure. Yes.
Yes. Then I promise you, if you'll do these things that we just talked about today, I know you've got your notes. Hopefully you wrote these things down. Go back though and watch this, because Russ will have this posted, definitely by this afternoon. Go back and watch this several times. Do what I'm suggesting. If you will do what I'm suggesting, I promise you, it will work. It is not a question of whether it will work. It's only a question of whether you will. And if you will, I promise you, you'll get the outcomes that you want. It's only a matter of time. So, having said that, let's finish this up. Any observations, questions, or ahas that you want to share before we close out the conversation? Any clarifications?
That's crystal clear to me, John.
Good.
Thank
Michael.
you.
You bet. Absolutely. Okay, gang. Well, if you
I
have any
just wanted
questions, any
to
way
say
that I can help
one
you, please
thing.
let me know. Oh yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
Sorry. My comment really is for me because this applies. If I would just do this, so I just don't want to come across the wrong way, because you guys are great. And sometimes we just have to remove the obstacles and go forward. And I'm not an example in some areas of my life, but not necessarily. So I just love the fact that you guys are so consistent. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I mean, lead by example, right? And we tend to attract who and what we are. And that's why I'm asking you. You'll see George and me in 4 out of 5 morning ascents. Even if we're not presenting, we're there. Gang, show up, be there. There are some markets that give you a greater margin of error, deviating from the things that we know are the truth, that are the pathway to your success. There are some markets that allow you to deviate further away from that truth. This is not one of those markets. And my fear is for some of you, you've only experienced a market where you can deviate from the truth to some extent and still do okay, at least earn some money. I'm telling you, this is not that sort of market. And if you continue to do that, this market will eat your lunch. And mark my words, before this is all said and done, we're going to see 30-40% of the agents get out of the real estate industry. Mark my words. And I don't want that to be your story, and it doesn't need to be. So let's stop complicating this. Go back to the things that I talked about today, that we talked about today, and make these things who you are. Make them your truths. And I promise you, you're going to have great outcomes. All right? Again, great job in joining me. Remember, Base Camp this Wednesday, 11 a.m. George is going to be leading that for an hour. It'll be a great conversation on how to succeed in